It's the spookiest time of the year. If you are looking for a fun and free way to engage your students this October leading up to Halloween, then you need to grab my free Halloween science resources for high school science teachers. I have created 4 themed activities for you. One is for biology, one for chemistry, one is for physics, and one is for anatomy. And each of these are activities that you can use with your high school students now through the end of the month leading up to Halloween. So be sure to grab those at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/Halloween. In last week's episode, we talked about what to do when students fail a test. How do you respond? Do you take the time to reteach? Do you move forward? Do you allow text corrections? Like, what's kind of the play here at the end of the unit when we realize they're not where we want them to be? But this week, we're going to kind of go the other direction. What do you do at the beginning of the unit, at the beginning of the school year, when you realize your students do not have the background knowledge? They did not get the prior instruction. They don't have the skills you'd expect them to have when they came to your classroom. Who is responsible then for making up that deficit, and how should that be done? Let's dive in. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. So just like last week, this episode was inspired by a scenario that one of you sent into me. And I'm going to read it to you because I just think a lot of you will be able to resonate with this. And so the teacher said this: I work in an urban district where 95% of my students do not have the prerequisite knowledge you would expect to see at their grade level. Due to this, they have struggled with comprehending even the simplest topics in biology, and they struggle with terminology as well. In response to this, I found myself constantly scaffolding assignments to make it simpler for them to understand. However, I can't maintain this long term. What advice would you give to help manage this and set a balanced schedule where I am not overworking myself? So first, let me say this. I want to give you a word of encouragement, and then, as always, we'll get very practical, I promise, okay? But first, now I don't want this to be like a cop-out, and I'm not trying to blame everything that's going on in the current education system on the pandemic, but I do think there has been a drastic decline in a lot of areas in students' resilience, in their capacity, and definitely in their preparation for your classes since the pandemic. I think so many accommodations had to be made, rightly so. We were all surviving, all doing the best that we could, and students got so far back during that time, and it's going to take serious time to recover from that. So I did a little math at the time of recording this in this episode going out. So it's fall 2025 right now. And I want to let you know something that I think hopefully it's going to encourage you. If you're a high school science teacher right now in the fall of 2025, your 9th graders, when I look back at the pandemic, I went back in the math, I feel like there were 3 school years that were the impact of the pandemic were felt the heaviest, okay? Obviously, the 2019 to 2020 school year. Now, the world kind of shut down in March. So for most of us, it just kind of affected that last quarter. So some may not count that full year as like a wash, but I'm just going to include it in here because we're going to round up here to try to be the most accurate as we can in terms of how big this impact could be. Okay, so we'll count that full year, even though it was really the last quarter. Obviously, the 2020 to 2021 school year was shot for most people, like nothing near what you ever would have done. I also feel like 2021, 2022 was an adjusting year. I always remember this because my youngest child was born in March of 2022. And I think a lot of people in their heads think, oh, we were past it in 2022. And I'm like, oh no, I still had to wear a mask when I was in delivery. Okay. I was puking the entire time I was giving birth, and they still kept shoving a mask on my face in between my puke. So I will never forget that, okay? I don't think it was until the 2022-2023 school year, at least where I am, where things started to feel normal again. So I feel like the critical years that were impacted were 1920, 2021, and 21-22. So with that context, current ninth graders, they were in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade during that critical time period, which means 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, which are extremely critical preparation years for them coming into high school, were years that they were just learning how to be in school again. Because prior to that, their only normal school experiences were like kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grade, which I have a kindergartner and a 2nd grader right now. Yes, they're learning things, but it still feels pretty basic. And I don't know how it is in every state, of course, but in my state, 3rd grade is a very pivotal year in elementary school. It's the year that my state has drawn some lines in the sand. And if you cannot read at this level by this point, you will not be moved along to 4th grade. Every single year, we have to sign like a contract basically saying we understand that this is going to happen if our kid is not at this level by 3rd grade. And then, of course, 4th and 5th, you're prepping them for middle school. So to think that our current 9th graders, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, basically all of upper elementary school was a wash. And then all of this adjustment period was happening for them in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, which really that should be a big preparation stage for them educationally. Okay, now let's think about like your upperclassmen, your 12th graders. The pandemic, the critical years for them were when they were in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Wow. I mean, I think about how many things as a 9th grade biology teacher I expected my students to come in with from their 6th, 7th, and 8th grade science teachers. And for our 12th graders, they didn't get any of that essentially. And so then their 9th, their 10th, their 11th grade years were really supposed to be able to start pushing them, like moving them towards adulthood. Those are almost like their middle school years. And like they're learning all these things they should have learned then. So I'm telling you all of this to kind of encourage you that it makes sense why things are the way they are. And that's kind of where your students' educational experiences have been up until this point. Now, for a little bit of encouragement, let's think about those critical years again. Next year's 9th graders, they will have had a weird 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, but they would have had 5th grade be adjusting, 6th grade adjusting, 7th grade adjusting, hopefully a very normal 8th grade year. If we give it another 2 years, those 9th grade students will have missed, COVID would have affected their 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. If we can hang in there for 3 years, our 9th graders in 3 years, COVID will have been their kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd. Now, while I still believe that will have had an impact on them for sure, I can speak to the fact that I have a kindergartner and 2nd grader right now. They are still very young and very resilient. And I feel like I could reteach them a lot of things in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade to make up for K1, 2. And then they're not only going to have 3rd, 4th, 5th, they'll have had 6th, 7th, 8th before they get to you. So obviously, if you're a middle school teacher listening, this may not feel as encouraging. But if you're a high schooler, I hope that gives you a little bit of hope. And if you can make it 6 years, then those are the students like my children. COVID affected them going to preschool and going to daycare. It did not affect kindergarten or anything like that at all. I am so grateful that my oldest, like his educational experience is as it should have been, essentially. So I know a lot of you are like, I'm not going to make it 6 years. Okay, so now we're going to get practical. I promise you we're going to get practical. But I just want to give you a little hope. Every year we're getting further and further from the pandemic. And of course, we have no idea how long it'll take to fully recover. But I think looking at those stats as I wrote out these things side by side, to me, that left me feeling encouraged. And I hope it makes you feel a little encouraged too, that like, we're going to get through this. Heaven forbid another happens. Okay, so now let's get really practical as we always do and talk about 4 things that I think how you kind of approach this deficit situation as you're trying to respond to it. Okay, so first, we are going to put this problem in its proper place. This is a systemic problem. Okay, this is not just like a you problem. This is not just a personal problem that like you're dealing with in your classroom or your school or your district. Okay, it's an everywhere problem. I'm hearing this everywhere. So it cannot then be, because it's not just your problem, it also cannot just be your burden to fix all that needs to be fixed. We're making up 3 years minimum of educational impact on your student. Those were 3 critical years that got affected. Plus still the years after that were weird because we were recovering from it. Okay. And so you can't be expected to make up for all of that in a 9-month period where you see your students maybe 50 minutes a day, 5 days a week, and still cover everything you're supposed to cover, assuming they have all the prior knowledge and skills that they should have. So like I always say, you can only do the best that you can within your current capacity with your current life's limitations of your current season. Can I say current more times? But truly, like I want to emphasize that it's current because this is not forever. I remember when I had my oldest, and I remember telling a friend, like an older friend who had older kids, golly, I just feel like we finally hit our groove. And then every 4 to 6 weeks, this baby has a new developmental milestone, is growing another tooth, is on a new sleep schedule, and I have to totally readjust. And I was like, when will things settle down and be more consistent? And she said, never. Like, welcome to having a child. Your season is literally going to change. And maybe it's more like it changes quarterly as opposed to monthly as it can with a newborn or weekly with a baby. But I think that is so true. And that's why I want to emphasize, if you're like me, I can get a little doomsday-ish. I'm not going to lie. It can be hard for me to see how things are not forever. I'm the type of person that, like, if I get the stomach bug, I'm literally like, will I ever eat food again? Like, it's hard for me to imagine a moment where I'll enjoy a cheeseburger again. You know, that's what I mean by doomsday. So I'm saying this to you because I have to say it to myself. Like, if you're especially feeling super limited by your current season, I just want to encourage you that it is a season. It will not last forever. So I hope that gives you the freedom to maybe do less in this season where you have greater limitations. I have many seasons of my life where I look back, especially I think postpartum with my second. As many of you know, I adopted my first. So my second was biological, and it was the first time I was experiencing a newborn while also experiencing a physical recovery of my body and my mind. And I had a 17-month-old. And I remember just feeling like I had to constantly push through and do all these things as opposed to just being like, this is such a limited season. Like, if I even had like given myself 6 months, I would have been in such a better space mentally, physically, emotionally. But I just kind of kept pushing. I felt so trapped by my limitations. And instead of saying like, hey, this is not going to be forever. I just need to like chill. This is a big adjustment right now. And so whatever you're going on in your life, and maybe it's like not something, you know, as serious as a new family member that you're taking care of or a new diagnosis health-wise. Maybe it's something like it's soccer season and you're the head soccer coach. Yeah, that's not like a heavy emotional burden that you maybe have, but it's a huge time burden. That's a huge responsibility. So in this current season that you're in, when it's soccer season, like, you're going to be limited in this season, and that's okay. When it's not soccer season, hopefully your school's not making you coach 14 sports. You will hopefully have more capacity. So all that to say, we put this problem in its proper place, and we're going to approach this problem just doing the best that we can, recognizing that we are limited beings and we are limited by our seasons of life. Our capacity changes on our seasons of life. There's things that you could do, you know, pre-children that you can't do post-children. There's things that you have capacity for when you have babies that you don't have when you have your own high schoolers. You know, like, all these different things are impacting our capacity. So I need to kind of shut my trap on that. But I just think it can't be overstated how your personal life like impacts how you approach this job. And so I just really like, I feel like reading that submission, I just was like, man, I can see how you could think this is all up to you, and it's not. And I just want everyone listening to hear, like, this is not up to you. Now, practical point number 2, let's identify your role in the solution here, okay? I'm a big proponent of not just like identifying problems, but solving them. I'm an Enneagram 1, so I'm quite the refiner. I can absolutely name problems, especially when it comes to like efficiency and effectiveness and productivity. I can identify problems very easily. And I have to push myself to not just voice the problems, but also solve them. So let's figure out what is our role in the solution. Okay, so there are things that I think fall within, you know, your capability and maybe your responsibility in your role as a teacher. But I think it requires us to ask ourselves some questions, because I think how we approach this deficit depends on each course that you teach. I think it's course dependent, and honestly, it can be unit dependent. Okay, so for example, some things I would be asking myself in terms of what's my role here is how important is what I am teaching to their success in the next course that they take? Okay, so for example, like if you teach biology or physical science, to me, a lot of that content that you're teaching and those skills when you have those freshmen, those sophomores are really critical to set them up for success to then go on to take like chemistry. But if you're teaching like an anatomy and physiology, maybe like an elective course, especially, could you cover less breadth and just go slower and cover less stuff, but better? And you say, hey, this is a course, this is a group of students that I could spend more time kind of making up that deficit. Again, I'm thinking of like, I would be having 11th or 12th graders in my anatomy course. As we said at the top, those are students that the pandemic was impacting their 6th, 7th, and 8th grade years. So they probably have a lot less skills than we would anticipate them to have before we're launching them out of high school into the real world, into post-secondary education, whatever that looks like. And so maybe it's saying like, hey, maybe traditionally I would want to cover every body system. I'm actually a big proponent of covering all the body systems and not even going in as much depth because I think I love exposing them to every body system. But even still, if you're seeing such a deficit, maybe that's a great opportunity of a course to be like, I'm going to be someone who's going to slow down and like make sure they know how to write well. They know how to write a CER well. They know how to do a graph well or analyze data well, because those are skills that are really going to support them as they move on, regardless of what that may be. Whereas maybe a different course you're teaching, it is important that you kind of get through it all. Or you teach an EOC course. So it's like, I don't have the luxury of teaching less so that I can have more time to make up the deficit. Like I have to cover all the stuff for the sake of the EOC. So I think that's something to kind of consider here. And we're going to come back to that in a minute. And then the other question to be asking myself is, how can I provide the students more support without doing a ton of extra work right now? For example, how can you utilize AI? Can you have AI take your notes? Can you upload your notes and say, hey, can you make a filled in the blank version of these notes for handout for my students? Or, you gave them 5 practice problems for physics. They normally should be able to knock out those 5 and move on. They bombed all 5. Instead of you rewriting an entire sheet, you plug it into AI and say, hey, can you make me 5 more problems like this for my students who need more practice because they're at a math deficit? So can you utilize AI as like kind of an assistant here? Can you use someone else's pre-recorded lecture videos and then flip your classroom to have more time in class? I have all of my lecture videos online. You do not need to use It's Not Rocket Science resources to access biology, chemistry, physical science, or anatomy lecture videos. Now, I think someone like Bozeman Science or Tyler DeWitt, if you teach chemistry, like maybe it's not exactly how you would do it, but to say like, hey, this deficit's so great, I need to like have more time in class to work with them on skills. That's one thing you can try and not put more effort on you. Say, hey, your all's expectation before you come to class is you're going to have watched these videos and you're going to have filled in these notes that I had this AI bot make for you guys. And then when we're in class, we're going to do all the labs and we're going to take a 2-day lab and spend 4 days on it so I can make sure you're really getting it. Okay. Another question I'd ask, can you grade less so that you have more time to be supporting students outside of school? Can you build in tutoring hours into your week for those who need it? And maybe it looks like saying like, hey, I'm just going to only grade what I can grade 30 minutes a day. And then I'm like moving on because I've got to save my planning period to have more time to scaffold resources for students. So those would be kind of the questions I'd be asking myself in terms of how can I play a part in this? Okay, I'd be assessing how much I really have to teach here. And then also, how can I provide them more support? Now, I'm going to say something a little controversial here. I'm going to speak to someone who teaches maybe like a chemistry. Okay, chemistry is a critical course. I love chemistry. I have an entire curriculum I wrote. I think it's my favorite curriculum. I love it. A lot of states require biology, chemistry, and one more lab science to graduate. So I know a lot of your students are required to take chemistry. And that chemistry background is going to be really important for your students that are going to go on to post-secondary education. But I think for some of our other students, chemistry is so much more about teaching them how to think critically and problem solve than it is about the actual content. So like I'm thinking about it's not rocket science curriculum for chemistry. It's 10 units. Could you just get through the first 6 or 7 and just not do the last 3 with your on grade level students so that you have more time to fill in those deficits? Is that an opportunity? And this isn't going to be forever. You'll have future years where you'll get to acids and bases and thermochemistry and all of that. But say, hey, I'm just going to do the first 6, maybe 7 units really, really well and take all the time that students need to get through them because they aren't taking an end of course exam. They don't necessarily need to know acids and bases and thermochemistry to go on to their next course. Would it help them if they're taking, environmental science as their 3rd lab science or earth space science as their 3rd lab credit? Of course, it would help. Like chemistry is foundational to everything, but it's not necessarily 100% required. Again, if they're going on to school because they are going to be a hairstylist and they're going to do dyes, they're going to have a lot of chemistry stuff there. But wouldn't you rather give them a really solid foundation on 60% of it and have the time and space to make up some of those skills they're lacking than be rushing for the sake of rushing when, your state said you had to cover these standards. But if there's no end of course exam and there isn't a lot of accountability, and if you do it, could this be a year or 2 as we're still recovering from the pandemic that you take the time to kind of catch them up? These are just questions to consider because everyone's situation is different. Now, you do have a role, but I also believe your students have a role. I want you to provide them tools. I think it is good to provide them, scaffolded notes or scaffolding in the assignments or, have built-in tutoring hours for those who need extra supports. I think it's critical that your expectations for your students are clear, but then I also think it's critical that they show up and they do the work. We are going to provide the tools. We are going to be clear in what we expect them to do and learn and understand, but then they do have a part in this. And so I have 3 episodes I'll link in the show notes you can check out that might help you if this is something you struggle with, is getting them to do their end of the bargain. Episode 123, what to do when you care more than your students. Episode 145, how to build resilience in post-pandemic students. And episode 155, how to create active and accountable learners. Okay, so students have to help. Now, one last thing before I get to the 3rd tip. I mentioned this before. I want to bring it up and go a little deeper. I do think these questions, the answers to them are content dependent. Okay, so let me give you an example. If I'm teaching biology, I get to my 2nd unit, cells, and I realize they have no prior knowledge of a cell organelle. I'm saying mitochondria and they're not even giving me at least the powerhouse of the cell, which all the biology teachers are cringing because no one wants them to say that. But at a minimum, I'm hoping they got that from 7th grade life science, okay? That is a deficit. I will say that is a deficit students can make up themselves, okay? So I think you need to identify, is that something they can make up themselves? Yes. If my students don't have any recognition of the organelles, I can give them, some Quizlet pre-made flashcards and say hey, you need to drill yourself on these. I'm going to make you retake an organelle quiz until you can get a 90% on it or something so that I know you got these down, because you're going to be confused as we keep going into cellular transport, cellular division, genetics, and biochemical reactions. Those are going to get confusing if you don't understand the basics of how a cell works, which you should have learned in 7th grade life science. We review it in Unit 2 cells, but we're not going in that much detail. We're kind of going through it. It's a quick review and we're moving on. So that's a deficit, a content-specific deficit students can make up themselves. On the other hand, I think about AP Bio. If I get to evolution of my AP Bio students and they still don't really get it, if they're still kind of thinking that organisms evolve, they don't realize populations evolve. If they don't understand the basic principle of natural selection as a mechanism for evolution that causes populations to evolve, not organisms. If they can't clearly articulate what an adaptation is and how it has to be a heritable trait, then to me, that's not something I'm going to be y'all need to read chapters 4 through 7 and relearn that. To me, that's a critical stop, reteach, and make sure they get it until I'm moving into calculating gene and allele frequencies or calculating Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Okay. So to me, that's a content dependent thing. So I think there are some decisions here you can make unit by unit. I don't think you have to be like, okay, I'm the teacher that's just going to commit the whole year to making it the 3-year pandemic deficit with all my classes. I think you take it as a case-by-case basis of like, is this something students could be responsible for on their own, making it this deficit? Or is this something that I really need to like stop the whole class and cover myself? So again, first, we're putting this problem in its proper place. And second, we're identifying our role in the solution versus our students' role in the solution here. And then the third thing you need to do is you need to recruit help. Here's what I want you to do. First, talk to the teachers behind you about where we need to triage. If you're teaching 9th or 10th grade or honestly, if you're teaching any high school science course and your students cannot figure out how to make like an even access on their scales for their graphs, or like how to effectively title a graph or label their axes, triage. I'm going back to middle school and saying like, these are the essential skills. I need you guys teaching them. Now, if you're at a private school, this is easy because like you can just walk down the hall and see the middle school teacher. If you're an upperclassman teacher, you can go talk to the 9th, 10th grade teacher, whatever. The hard thing is if you're a 9th or 10th grade teacher, you may not know these middle school teachers at a different school that are just getting funneled to you. And that's where your admin are going to come in. But we're going to get to that in a second. But I think talking to the teachers behind you is so important. And I have benefited so much. Pre-pandemic teaching, I remember I actually went to the chemistry teacher ahead of me when I was writing my physical science curriculum because I was like, hey, the NGSS isn't extremely clear about all of the content that I thought I was supposed to teach in physical science based on the textbook I was given, based on the scope and sequence that the district gave me. But the NGSS is leaving a lot to be desired. So I want to hear from you, since my physical science students are having physical science with me, then biology with me, and then they were going on to a different teacher for chemistry at that time. Hey, what is the most important thing you need from me? And he made a list of like 4 to 5 things. He was like, these would be like my top 5. And here would be like the 10, I would say, if you like want a longer list. And that was such a gift to me, especially with a course like physical science, which like, yeah, there's standards, but it's not an EOC course in most states. So it's like, there's some flexibility here. To me, I love teaching physical science because it's my opportunity to really give them these foundational skills and to introduce chemistry and physics and all of these science skills they need for future science courses. So I'm going to the teachers ahead of me and saying, what do you need most? So we're recruiting help by telling the people behind us what we need from them, and then going to the teachers ahead of us and saying, what do you need most from me? I understand, like if you teach biology, you're like, I have an EOC, I can't do anything for the chemistry teacher. Okay, I hear you. That's fine. I'm not speaking to you. But most other sciences, if you teach basically any other science, most likely you're not the EOC course. And I know you might have an AP or anything like that, but ask them. Like I know you might have an AP or another, high stakes course, an IB course, whatever. I'm not trying to downgrade the importance of non-EOC courses, but I'm just trying to say like, those should be the people we're really talking to and we're helping each other. Like I'm going to tell you what I need from you. You're going to tell me what you need from me, that kind of thing. I would also say in terms of recruiting help, like I said, talk to your admin. We are on the front lines. We're triaging a lot of people bleeding out right now. We can't also be the general at the battle scene coming up with every battle plan and solution. Okay, so we need to ask admin, what do they advise? This is especially if you teach an EOC course or something like that is high stakes, because I have just personally found in my experience, my admin care way more about my EOC courses or my AP courses than they care about my others. And saying, hey, I know you want to see success here because you want these numbers to look good. I'm telling you, these kids are at this deficit. I do not have the capacity to prepare them well for this EOC and make up for this deficit. How can you support me? How can you help me help these kids? It could be as simple as, okay, you're going to create a bridge in a conversation with the middle school that funnels in, and we're going to audit what they're doing there to make sure that they're helping prepare students for your class. Maybe it's saying, hey, these kids have such literacy deficiencies. Can you go to the English department and see what they're doing so they can help these students be successful in the biology exam? Maybe it's a math deficiency. They need to go talk to the math department. Like they should be bridging these gaps for you. That's something that they can do in their role. They are an overseer over all people in your school. Another thing is, how could they help you have more margin to serve your students better? So if you can't outsource some of these things that you need help with in the deficit to the middle school classes, to the English department, to the math department, whatever, to another science teacher, like how can they then give you more margin to serve your students? Especially, again, I think you have a lot of bargaining chips here, influential powers, if you will, if you're teaching a high stakes course, because they care about those scores. So it's looking at, can I have an extra planning period? Can I have less hallway monitor duty, lunch duty, after school duty, so that I have more capacity to have tutoring sessions with students? Can I not coach a sport for a year so that I can have more time to create all these scaffolded resources that my students need? This is one of my favorite proponents of purchasing curriculum that was written by teachers for teachers, not just textbook curriculum, okay? Because then it's not going to actually be that helpful, at least in my own experience. I think there are a lot of great teacher authors out there that are actually going to know what resources are actually effective with real students in real classrooms. And I don't think textbook curriculum writers understand that. But saying, can you buy me this curriculum so that then I'm not doing any lesson planning, and all that time I was spending lesson planning can now be spent taking these pre-made labs and all these practices and stuff that I have and leveling them for our students' needs, or running the practice problems through AI to get extra ones, or, scaffolding it. So there are so many ways they can help you. I have an entire podcast episode about it. It's episode 69. It's all about admin support. There's ways they can help you without spending a dime. There's ways they can invest in you with resources and other things financially. So again, recruit help. This is not just your problem to solve. And last but not least, I got so much more long-winded on this than I anticipated. And I'm so sorry if you're like, can you wrap it up? I just feel so passionately about this. And as someone who often adopts problems, that may or not entirely be my problem to solve, I just feel for you all and I want to equip you. So last but not least, I do think you need to decide what matters most. And I think this is going to potentially be different in every course you teach. And this could change next year. But like this school year, what matters most? Maybe in your biology class, it's passing the EOC exam. Maybe in your chemistry course, it's getting them the critical thinking skills they need to be successful as adults in the real world. Maybe in physical science, it's making up as much of the deficit as you can for their skills that they came in lacking. I don't know what it is, but I think deciding what matters most just gives you a lens through which then you can make every decision. One of my virtual PD courses is about your core values. I'll link it in the show notes, but it really helps you kind of project those for an entire school year, and then you can take them down to the micro level. Again, this could also just be different as you start each unit. So like, for example, first unit in my biology curriculum, biology basics. If I notice in that unit that they have a graphing deficit, I'm probably not going to take the time to reteach it there, because I know we have so many other future graphing opportunities where I can keep working on that with them throughout the year. I can go see the algebra teacher and say, I need them to help me on this. There's other things that I can do there. Now, if they're struggling with macromolecules in my biology basics unit, what matters most at the end of my first unit in my biology class is that they understand macromolecules, because to me, that is the most foundational concept in biology. In every single other unit, I can tie it back to a macromolecule. So to me personally, I would then make the decision, like, if you don't understand macromolecules by the end of this unit, I'm going to stop everything to make up that deficit. Because to me, that's the most important for our future in this class. So decide what matters most. Maybe it's by unit, maybe it's by a course, maybe it's just for all your courses this school year. But that's what I really want you to think about. Okay, so your take-home challenge: put this problem in its proper place, identify your role in this situation, in the solution for the situation versus what your students' roles can be. Get some help. You should not be doing this yourself, and decide what matters most to you. Remember, this is a multi-year worldwide deficit that all teachers have experienced and that we're still recovering from. So you should not be trying to solve all this on your own. So I hope this helps equip you and encourage you. You can find the show notes for this episode and all those other episodes I reference that you might want to listen to at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 203. And if you have yet to leave a review for the podcast on Apple, I would love it if you would leave a 5-star rating and a review. especially for those of you listening who felt encouraged and equipped now in handling these deficits our students may have. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.